This is something that's been bothering me so much in my mind ever since I saw this episode. After getting swarmed by the cicadas, Marielle, Randall, and Julie started turning into something that definitely is not human. After their eyes lost all color and became all white afterwards, it was like they became mindless demons or zombies. Except even zombies have some awareness of the environment, but it was like she didn't even know that they were right in front of her. And that really makes you wonder, what exactly did the cicadas do to these guys? Marielle, Julie, and Randall, all of them ended up having the same exact symptoms. So it seems their entire purpose is to turn people into this catatonic state. It's also very interesting to remember that Randall was running in the woods when he got swarmed by the cicadas, and it seemed like the monsters completely ignored his body. They didn't try to kill him or torture him or do anything to him, even though he was laying at this random place in the middle of the forest. So that's incredibly interesting. It's like when the radio started playing static and the entity or apparition or whatever the fuck it was showed up while Boyd was in the RV. It really reminds me of what happened at that time. When that happened, the monsters completely stopped moving and they didn't even try moving closer to the RV. And I wonder exactly why that is. Is it because this entity is their boss, or is it just because this thing is above them in the monster hierarchy? If this is the same entity controlling the cicadas, then it makes sense that out of fear of this entity, the monsters didn't attack Randall while he was laying in the woods. And maybe the fact that these monsters had seen Smiley getting completely decimated by the worms just a few days ago, maybe that had something to do with their reaction as well. And something about Randall is, remember, he was laying down there for hours and hours, so they definitely had more than enough time to find him, especially considering they actually saw him running away from the RV, so they'd already know where to start looking for him. It definitely seems like the monsters recognized this guy and the cicadas as being above them in importance. One of the craziest things about what happened to Marielle and the others when they were in this state is that when Boyd gets transported to the dungeon for the second time, we actually discovered that Marielle, Julie, and Randall's bodies had been locked up there. And it really makes me ask so many different questions. Like, I've never really thought about this before, but it's actually really confusing. How is it that their bodies have been locked up here in the dungeon, even though back in the town, the people are still looking after their bodies? That seems to imply some insane parallel dimension shenanigans. Either that, or it's their souls that were locked up in the dungeon, not their bodies. But even then, it still makes you ask so many other questions. For example, why didn't he just take somebody from the town? It seems like the entity that took them has to go through this entire process in order to finally end up getting people into the dungeon. It seems like that entity can't just take some random person from the town. And I just gotta ask, why is that? Why didn't he just randomly take 3 people? It's like there's conditions that have to be fulfilled before he can do that. And there was also that entire poem that we never really got an explanation for. It doesn't really explain the people who got chosen by the cicadas. The only one who really stands out among them would be Marielle, because she's Christie's fiancée, and she's the first person who ever came to Fromland that knew somebody else who was already in Fromland. So she's the only one who really stands out to me. But everybody else who was chained up in the dungeon, they don't really stand out except for the fact that they were also infected by the cicadas. But the fact that they had to be infected before they got chained up has to mean something. But I don't know why it has to be that way. It's impossible to tell if there's something beyond this entity forcing things to be this way, or if it's intentionally inhibiting its own abilities to make the game more fun for itself. Basically, I want to know, is that entity just another player in the game, or is he the creator of the entire thing? We don't know the answer. And that's a really big piece of the puzzle that we're missing. It seems like there's an entire process it has to follow, like there's rules that have to be followed for it to get people to the dungeon. Almost like it has to earn the pleasure to torture these people. Because if the dungeon entity is the same one that told Sarah it hates them, I assume it means that it hates humanity and enjoys torturing people. Why would it go through this entire process to make the possibility of doing that so much harder for itself? And when Boyd destroyed the music box, the Abby entity couldn't do anything to stop him, even though it's obvious it didn't want that to happen. So it's like there's guidelines that this entity or these entities have to follow. But if that's the case, I'm very curious to know what would happen if it just went straight for the people in the town. I really wonder what would happen if it did that. Or is that how the worms came to be in the dungeon in the first place? Maybe it broke the rules and that's why it was imprisoned there to begin with. Whatever state the cicadas turned them into seems to be really terrifying. It's like a state where they can't feel anything, and then their soul or something like that gets sent to the dungeon, and then seemingly they get tortured to death. But it's interesting because Sarah says to Boyd, when they die, it'll be too late.
Julie and the others, they're dying. They're dying. And when they die, it'll be too late.
But it's a very weird line when you think about it. It's like it implies they're turning into something. It's like saying after they die, they won't be able to turn back into what they used to be. The phrasing is very suspicious in my eyes because you wouldn't say that if you knew someone was gonna die. All you would say is, if we waste too much time, they're gonna die. Rather than what Sarah said, which is, when they die, it'll be too late. The wording is very different and that changes the meaning. That implies they'd still be alive in some form, just not the way you want them to be. And that maybe goes into what Jasmine said, i.e., they didn't choose to be this way. And to be fair, we have actually seen somebody with white eyes before in the series. This was way back in season 1 when Jade had that vision dream, whatever those things are, when he had one of those. But the thing is, with this guy, it's only in one eye, and the rest of his face had been burned off, I guess. Maybe they tried burning him alive or something. Maybe that's why he's revenging against them, I don't know. But even if this is what Marielle and the others were turning into, then we'd have another question, which is, why did it affect only one of the eyes and not the other? It also seemed like this guy was committing a massacre. I'm guessing like what supposedly happened with Christopher, but we still don't actually know what happened with Christopher or the circumstances that led to Victor's massacre. There was somebody else we saw that had white eyes, and I can't fucking believe that I forgot about this, but that guy who got absolutely smashed by a boulder that Jade saw, that guy also had the white eyes, so there does seem to be something going on with these white eyes. They seem to represent something that we don't really know about just yet. The idea that they were turning into one of the monsters, that's an interesting one, because when we take a look at Smiley's death, in one of the frames you can actually see that he has one of those reptilian eyelids, and you can actually see it very clearly. In one of the frames where he's blinking, the color of that eyelid is in fact white, and it looks really similar to what Marielle, Julie, and Randall had. It just makes my mind bounce around when I'm thinking about the possibilities of what this means, of what getting infected by the cicadas actually means. The way I see this is there's 3 options. With the information we have now, I can only come to these 3 different conclusions. Either this is the process for turning them into one of the monsters, Or 2, it's how you get turned into whatever this guy was, or they were just gonna die and that's it. Nothing special about it, they were just gonna die. At best, maybe they become one of those voices that keep talking to Sarah that we still don't really know about, whatever the hell is going on with that. But I hope we are told, or better yet, we get to see the outcome of this entire process in a future season, hopefully season 3. The sooner they tell us what exactly the point of this is, the better.